Let's start with mantra. Om Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langhayate Girim Yat Kripatam Maham Vande Paramananda Madhavam. Okay, so today we have this last topic. Of course, it is just randomly chosen topics which are most important for our modern times, and that is the ego and true soul, our desire and aspiration. There is a fundamental difference between the two, the ego and the true being within us as we know it, yes? And the whole Karma Yoga project is about removing that motivation which comes from the lower forces of nature and to be motivated by our innermost self, our true soul. So how to remove that particular flavor or that particular influence of outer forces? And what is this ego about? This is a big question because ahankara is not really truly defined anywhere. It is taken for granted that we understand what ahankara is. So I would rather ask you first to give your view. What is ahankara according to you? What is this ego sense or egoism or egocentric consciousness? How would you define it? What does it do really? What is happening when we have that perception of ourselves as ego beings? Ego is not negative, it is rather technical term. Yes, please.
I think it separates us from others. It's a way to separate ourselves, to define ourselves,
Yes,
distinct and different from the other.
right. And ego, as we know, it is I-ness, ahankara, yes? Doing I. Literally, ahankara means doing constantly I this, I that. And there is also another term, mamatva. Mamatvam is minus and I-ness. Yeah? They even joke in English like this, yes? I, me, myself and I, there is already a crowd here. It's all about me, myself and I. So the rest is complementary, as it were. So where does it come from? Why it must be there, that separative consciousness which holds us in a particular self conscious state or recognizing ourselves as separate beings? Why is that there? How does it form itself? Why it is opposed to that innermost being in us?
Yes. Can I?
Yes, please.
Yes. So I've thought of this a lot in my life, and so currently this is my best understanding. That if we go with like the Chinese medical model, there is innate chi from the parents, memories, genetic memories from the parents that pass down through the bloodline. They have the same thing now in modern medicine, which is epigenetics. It's memories that are passed down, samskaras, the memories of that's passed down. And from neuroscience, it's neural pathways that are become established in the brain. So it seems like consciousness is, and consciousness begins to identify with the body. And you can really see that from an infant, a newborn baby, all the way up through the life cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like it's that memory, that identity to our physical form. And the more identified we are of that, then the more we feel like we're separate from each other, separate from God, separate from the natural world.
Mhm.
And that's it for me. So
Very nice.
I'd love to hear you break that apart. I'm always up for
Mm.
another level of learning.
Wonderful. Yes, it is that kind of identity with this particular body, with this particular time of birth, this particular lagna, this particular mission, this particular learning, this particular time and space, nationality, family, and so on and so forth. There are so many sanskaras, and Buddhists are dealing with these sanskaras that we choose for our own self-development, particular portion of forces we choose for ourselves to be something. It's as if we are playing some role and try ourselves in that role and want to fulfill ourselves in that narrow space and time in some way. Yes, it's beautiful. What you described is really a kind of explaining all this. And even from the perspective of Jyotisha, if Radha would say a few words, this particular birth in time and space, this unique, you know, interpretation of oneself in this time and space, this formation of the body, formation of the vital, formation of the mind in a specific way, with the resources which are given to us by the cosmos. And cosmos provides us with resources to build these bodies. So this altogether creates that what we know as ourselves. Yeah? Yes, Radhe, or someone.
Question,
Yeah.
Vladimir. So you and I have spoken about this in private before, and like from perhaps Advaita perspective, there is no self, and then from Aurobindo perspective is that involution and evolution, and that's the self becoming and becoming conscious and returning to the Godhead, awakened and realized. So I'd like to hear you speak tonight, if you can, something about those two concepts.
Very nice, very nice. Thank you for this. Actually, in Buddhistic view, in Buddhistic philosophy, there is no self. These are all sanskaras coming together. So that's exactly what ego is about. It's this putting together forces in a particular incarnation, in a particular time and space, or role, whatever we play, whatever we imagine ourselves to be. We are that, but that is not real. That is not forever. That is only a transition of some kind of forces. For Sri Aurobindo, it is real in one particular way, that it is an evolution of consciousness, a development. There is someone there behind all that which evolves and develops. And in spite of all those sanskaras which are temporarily and they are not really forever, still they play their role, they have their place in our self-development. So there is a spark in us which is reincarnating and growing. According to Buddhistic view, there is no this spark which is reincarnating and growing. It's just something reincarnating until it is exhausting all these samskaras, and finally you are free. But that's how Buddhism lost to Shankara, because that debate was exactly on that ground. If Buddhists also believed that nothing is reincarnating, but something is reincarnating, but there is no self, then who is that who is becoming free? So that question they couldn't answer. That's why they left India and they went to the Far East, to China and Japan, and spread in the Far East, leaving India, because they couldn't really manage this particular answer. If nothing is there, then how come that something is reincarnating? Only sanskaras? Sanskaras by themselves cannot reincarnate. It's a set of instruments or some kind of set of energies which we draw when we are born for our own journey. And who is that one who draws? And this is the question of true soul and ego form. Yeah? Ego is our role. It is the we assume a particular role, as in drama of Shakespeare. Yes? We are all actors and play this drama. And in that particular way, we play that role. So, what is, if somebody else has some definitions or some thoughts about it, please go ahead before I plunge into my own. Yes, please, Martha.
Yes, I think that identification with the physical form, as was mentioned by another attendee, that's so much to do with our ego sense and who we think we are. We that and the surface personality, and it's particularly meaningful to me to, after thinking so much in terms of transcending ego or dissolving ego or negating ego, to understand from Sri Aurobindo that there's a purpose to ego in our individuation, as someone did mention, the individuation for the purpose of evolution.
Absolutely.
We can't evolve as an amorphous mass. We have to be identified in some way, and then make the journey that we have to make in the evolution.
Absolutely, very beautiful. So ego was the helper, and ego is the bar, as Sri Aurobindo says. And so it was the helper. It was doing something very, very important for us to be formed as individual being in the inner terms, because inner being is also evolving and developing. And ego, in some way, is a helper. Yes, Bill, you wanted to say something.
I've always, well, I love the question and from everybody, but the malas are, I find, helps me understand. It's a Kashmir Shaivite. The Anava mala would be there's 3 root coverings. Anava mala being a sense of lack. I'm here. There's something to do. I'm not done. I'm not complete somehow. And the second one being Maya mala, which is I look out with that sense of lack and I see differences. And then the karma mala, I'm propelled outwards and judge the differences, a little more of this, a little less of that. And until that root sense of lack is literally shattered by anugraha, the sense of grace. Maybe in the Gita would be the chapter, the vision of the cosmic form. It does the 180, so to say, back into oneness. But I've always been fascinated with that sense of lack. There's something left to do. Am I done? Am I done? It's a beautiful contemplation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this. I think, yes, Sri Aurobindo speaks about this in other terms, that a man is a transitional being. It's not something we arrived at. Yeah? We are on the way. The Veda speaks about the man as ever advancing pilgrim. There is always something to accomplish, and there is always grace to be invoked, and there is never final kind of emancipation of our own journey. There will be constant journey upward or inward, or even if we are already accomplished in some way and found our unborn self and identified with it, still the journey continues, as Sri Aurobindo says, even but already from light to greater light, yes, not from darkness to light anymore, but from light of knowledge to greater light of knowledge. Can you imagine such a journey? So there will be always something to learn, as Sri Aurobindo says. There is always something to learn from infinity. There is never a lack of that, learning. So there will be always lack in some way. So that evolution will constantly continue forward. Yes. So, are there some ideas or some? No.
Vladimir, I just wanted to share one thing.
Yes, please, Shilpa.
So I'm not 100% sure which text this refers to, whether it's Bhagavad Gita or Vedas, but what I have heard is that the soul basically goes through numerous cycles of births before it attains the human form. It's said about 84 lakhs or something. I really don't remember that number, but uh, when they get the when the soul gets the human form, that's one basic opportunity to attain moksha. And typically, if you lose that opportunity, you have to go through the other cycles. I mean, I don't know if that next form is again a human form or not, but what I've heard thus far is that that cycle of going through 84 different forms of species that are available is mentioned somewhere in Vedas. I really don't know, Vladimir, if you can just throw some light on that.
So our journey, previous journey, yes, it's going through many manvantaras, many kalpas. It's not the first time we are arriving at some self-consciousness and some formation. The attempts were made many times, and we actually, if you look at our embryonic life, by the way, that was the discovery of um, Stanislav Grof, when he was dealing with this embryonic life and stages of embryonic life. He discovered that people who know nothing about Vedic or Indian mythology, they were drawing pictures in deep meditation. They were drawing pictures of the events of Indian mythology. They were drawing Mahakali, they were drawing this oceanic stage, as he calls, sitting on the whale and moving through infinite ocean. It's the first stage. So, and then he discovered that actually these stages altogether are describing some kind of evolution of consciousness. And if we compare the embryo life that embryon develops within, at every stage we have a stage of particular evolutionary development of species. Yeah? So it starts with the plant life, conception of life, and then we have that development into the fish, and embryo of human beings resembles totally the fish embryo when it is already ready to be born. And then it evolves into some frogs, and then into some animals, finally lizards, then animals, then finally a human being. So within 9 months we cover the whole evolution. Each embryo corresponds to a particular stage of species, each stage of this embryo. Can you imagine? So within 9 months we cover the whole process of evolution on Earth. That's how we know how to deal with everything in this world, how other animals feel and what they really represent, because they are ourselves in the evolutionary past. We took bodies from them. We've been there. We went through those stages of embodiment. It's quite unique if you think about it. Within 9 months you cover the whole, from the beginning till the end, the process of evolution within the body. So, of course, I'm just deviating this topic away from the mythology of being, being embodied in different animals, though in Jatakas, especially Buddhistic Jatakas, you find many stories. Yeah, so we can, as our species, we develop to a certain level and then we stop in that perfection. For example, elephants cannot develop further, or crocodiles. They stopped at certain perfect stage of development. That body cannot provide more, or some higher consciousness. So they have to leave those species. They have to overgrow or grow into some other species. Nature has to provide another set of possibilities. That's what happens to human beings today. We need another body. We need more spiritual body. We are looking for new capacities which this body cannot provide. This brain cannot provide. So this brain develops, looks for new possibilities, and so on and so forth. So until nature breaks through and creates another set of possibilities, and then our souls embodying in that set of possibilities will build up another body, and so on. So this is how we break through these species and move forward as the soul. Yes.
Very
The-
interesting. Thank you.
So in a way, it should be like this. Even if I behave like a dog, so nowadays dogs are very nice and polite and very nice friends. So they are much nicer than people sometimes. Then, of course, if I behave like a mad dog, then of course it could be that my possibility would be to be born in the lower, as Papa Yonayach, as Gita would say, in the sinful yonis, in the sinful houses. Why sinful? We can say even in the lower houses of consciousness. So in some animal kingdom where you cannot express yourself in a human way or something like this. I think it's possible. Everything is possible. On the scale we can move up and down. So in some way Jatakas are true, though it sounds very improbable if you think about it, that we will be born as monkeys or crocodiles. But if we behave as crocodiles, why not? Maybe it's better formation for our consciousness, yes, to be embodied in the crocodile. I'm joking. This is kind of joke.
So, question.
Yes.
So you're speaking of individual beings rather than one being with many parts or many bodies, right? Isn't that kind of the concept, that one concept is there's God is one being, and there's many bodies or many parts, or that God. So maybe in like some of the esoteric Christian thinking, it's there is but one sun, and that sun created many beings from itself that is itself. But the other concept is that there is no self. So right now, when you're speaking about this thing that's going through this evolution, embryonic evolution, are we talking about an individuated being, or
Right.
are we talking about one consciousness that's experiencing through many different bodies?
We are talking about individuated being, which is experiencing different sets of typal possibilities, which you refer to as consciousness in general. So each level of consciousness has a particular set of instruments which we may adopt and use for our self-development. But there is something which is evolving and developing. And this is the contribution of the Gita and Sri Aurobindo, which is going a little bit against what Advaita thinks, or what Advaita Vedanta of Shankara, or Buddhistic view where there is no self, there are only samskaras and nothing else.
Right, and that's where the mother comes in, about that evolution from the atom evolving back, and to God involutes into the atom and evolutes out back into the oneness. Is that correct? So
Yeah,
an individual self that it realizes the oneness of all things.
right.
Okay.
He wanted to be many according to the Vedic vision. Bahusyam, may I be many. And that is his plan, how to become many. The one who alone is wanted to be many. How? How would you become many if you alone are? Just think. It's quite a fascinating process, yeah? you have to undergo stages of denial of yourself. You have to forget yourself in your consciousness and start your journey as if another self, and evolve and develop into unique individuality, which is you, supreme, but which is not alone, but many, and have relations between themselves. This is more like Ramanuja's, Vishishta Advaita, or Kashmiri Shaivism in that way, which is closer to that, where the soul is not denied its own unique representation or its own unique being. Though it is united with the universal self, it is one with it, and still it has its unique entry and unique view on the world. So this is a mystery of our incarnation and our life here. So these two, ego and true soul, how do they relate? This ego formation from outside, if we look at the views how it is presented in the Upanishads, and so we have this consciousness which is inbuilt into the self, as it were. This is this yellow. So, and this consciousness has faculties such as seeing, hearing, mind, like feeling, prana. So annam pranam chakshu shrotra manovacham. This is the definition of consciousness in the Upanishads. And these faculties can turn either without, look without, indriyas as we call them in Sankhya, senses. Senses represent consciousness. Either they sense our outer body, outer existence, that means they turn to adhibhuta, that which is on the periphery, or they can turn within, and then they look for our innermost being, adhyatma, for our inner self, either without or within. We spoke about it last time. So how to reconcile between the two, how to make the inner perceive the outer and the outer look for the inner. So we need something like this paradigm, that both ways have to be there, established, from inner out and from outer in, through the faculties. Now, where is this ego sense coming in? Somewhere in between. It looks like that ego sense will come, separated sense of oneself will come somewhere within these adhidaiva, within these faculties of consciousness. And by the way, there is nowhere the origin of ahamkara is defined. I found it only in one Upanishad, Aitareya Upanishad, and even there it is defined in a very unique and hidden way. When the faculties of consciousness of universal Purusha were projected plunged into the darkness of the lower inconscient ocean, they started to cry out to the divine to build them the body in which they could dwell and partake of delight, because they didn't have the body. They were projected. His mouth broke forth from mouth, his mouth speech from his speech, fire came into being, his nostrils broke forth, his means universal Purusha. From there the prana came into being, from prana vayu, his eyes broke forth, from eyes the sight, the seeing, from seeing sun was born, the light. The light was the consequence of him wanting to see. His ears broke forth, from ears hearing, from hearing space came into being. So you can see that space is the consequence of him wanting to hear himself. Light is the consequence of him wanting to see himself. So this is how these faculties broke forth, and then they plunged into the darkness of inconscient, and there they met these two torturers, hunger and thirst. Hunger as the lack, again this is the word lack of being, and thirst as the lack of delight and consciousness. And this lack started to torture them. to twist their limbs, and they cried to the divine, create for us a place in which we can dwell safely as in universal Purusha, but now in individual form, yes, but we will partake of food. So he created for them first the cow, then the horse. They said it's well done, but it's not enough for us. And finally he brings them Purusha, a human being, a human form, a human body. And they said it is well done. And he tells them, like, enter him as your own place for dwelling. So fire became speech and entered his mouth. Wind became breath and entered his nostrils. Light, the sun, became the sight and entered his eyes. Space became hearing and entered his ears. So everything was reassembled within the individual now. All those universal faculties came back to one individual. But when the offering was made to these devatas within the individual frame, the hunger and thirst were there also partaking of that very offering. Hunger and thirst. They made these faculties, universal faculties, to look for their self-satisfaction. That's why we are preoccupied only with one thing in this life. We want to satisfy our faculties of consciousness, or our senses. We want to have a beautiful sight, a beautiful sound, beautiful, taste, touch. We are looking to satisfy constantly our own set of senses because they represent consciousness, higher consciousness. And these representatives of higher consciousness have full right to have absolute satisfaction, absolute delight in this existence. And they know it because they are from the origin of universal Purusha. So they are looking for this absolute satisfaction and running for that. And here we come to this particular interesting definition of what Gita defines. Let us look into this. It is here. I moved it somewhere. Here it is. How the desire comes into being. It is in the second chapter. Dhyayato vishayan pumsach sangasteshu panjayate sangat samjayate kamah kamat krodho bhijayate. In him whose mind dwells on the object of sense, so senses are captivated by the object of sense with absorbing interest because they want to find full satisfaction there, absolute satisfaction. Attachment to them is formed, and that attachment becomes the problem. And from that attachment arises the desire. And from desire, anger comes forth. And from anger, the anger leads to bewilderment. We forget who we are. And from the bewilderment comes loss of memory. We start forgetting what we are, who we are, and why we are here for. And by that, the intelligence is destroyed. And from the destruction of intelligence, he perishes. He forgets himself. So here the whole lineage of starting from desire, which is created by the attachment of the senses to the object of sense. That's why he wants to introduce karma yoga, to disengage the senses from the object of sense, allowing them to be active but not attaching themselves to the fruit of action. That's the whole secret of how to get rid of this motivated, the desire as motivator. So what I want to say is that the origin of our ego is inbuilt in the senses. They are creating this image of ourselves. Here is a very beautiful picture which can explain what is ego. I took it and modified it from Matthias' presentation, from his article on consciousness. And you can see that the ego is the outer formation which is which is formed from our outer mind, outer vital, and outer physical perception, consciousness. And they are contributors to our outer sense of being, the body, the vital, and the mind, but outwardly formed in this particular manifestation. And if you go deeper, you will see that beyond it, there is a psychic entity, which is the true being, so of which ego is actually a shadow, as it were, which went through many filters, which went through the filters of mental self, vital self, and physical self, which went through the filters of inner mind, vital, in inner physical and also subconscious levels, which also participated. These are more universal resources for the mind, vital, or subliminal levels, as Sri Aurobindo calls them. And finally, the outer mind, outer vital and outer physical, formed in this particular presentation, which we understand as ourselves. And here we are. So how to come back, how to allow that inner psychic entity to come to the front and to remove this particular formation, or to make it, how to say, a servant of the divine work. And that's more appropriate to speak in that way, because Sri Aurobindo in many letters on yoga speaks about this, and Martha was mentioning already this, that ego, one cannot get rid of ego. Yeah? We can get rid of egoism or some kind of egocentric view on ourselves, but ego is very useful and can be a very good servant of work here in the outer consciousness. It has to be trained. It has to learn to surrender itself to its true being and to become instrumental for it. As Sri Aurobindo would say, that the senses, the faculties, have to deny in themselves this constant running for self-satisfaction and become consciously passive of their inner source. They have to welcome the inner light as their original light and bring it to the surface. Is it too much? Maybe it's too much. Too many things said in one go. If it is, please, yes, to break me, stop me, and I will develop slowly these ideas.
I love this inquiry and discourse, but would you just bring consciousness, the word and the concept of consciousness, to the forefront now, so I can begin to understand some of these concepts with the word consciousness.
Right.
Consciousness itself, consciousness and inner being, consciousness and Atman, and the true self and the soul. Is it interchangeable for you?
Purusha is consciousness. Yeah? And now there are three in Indian tradition. There are three types of consciousness. There is Brahman consciousness.
Yes.
And there is Atman consciousness, which is more Jivatma, yes, which is one with the spirit, but it is something already individual in some way. Individual perception, or how to say, self-perception of the self becomes Atman. When Brahman perceives or becomes conscious of itself, he becomes Atman. It becomes he, Atman. So it becomes he. He becomes the center of his own self-awareness. Then there is a projection of it into the psychic entity. So Atman, according to Aitareya, creates Purusha. Purusha is that consciousness for embodiment. That's why Purusha was sacrificed, because he brought his faculties forward for embodiment. These faculties, seeing, hearing, speaking, were not available within Atman. There had to be some creation made, some form of Purusha consciousness. Yes. Later we know Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha is synonym of Atman, but it is not totally true. Purusha is the formation for the manifestation of Atman. How to manifest Atman in time and space. We need faculties. We need different senses. Because how could we create this variety of relations if we have only one sense, one consciousness, and one being? It's impossible. You need the varieties. You need seeing, hearing, difference between seeing and hearing. You need speaking and thinking. You need feeling and being in the body. You need different faculties of consciousness. And they come in with Purusha. And that is here. You see this Purusha? This is the part of Purusha. Atman, with long ago we spoke about this Manomaya Purusha, Pranamaya Purusha, and Annamaya Purusha. The embodiment of Atman in the form of Purusha. As Taittiriya would say, Purusha Vidha, in the form of Purusha. It's important. Atman in the form of Purusha, not Atman without the form of Purusha. Otherwise you don't have consciousness which can act in this manifestation. You will have consciousness which is not which is beyond manifestation, but not within. Maybe that answers partially where this consciousness is. It's everywhere. It's in Atman, in psychic being, in all these selves, in all these subliminal selves, in our outer self, and it is in our ego sense. It is everywhere. Consciousness pervades everything. And there is no place where it is not. Because it is conscious, it's the work of this consciousness. All right, if you have some questions, please, and otherwise I will jump into the presentation of how Gita views these things. This scheme has to be studied, or if you can print it out, meditate upon it. It's actually the knowledge, knowing which everything can be known, as it were. You know. It's quite a remarkable kind of what Matthias did out of this Indian knowledge, how he put it into the perspective. And we can see immediately these two connections of our unborn self, which is beyond, which is above the head, and our inborn self, psychic entity, which is within the heart, the spark, their relations. One is projection of the other. And still, Atman is pervading everything. Atman is the being, which gives us beingness in a Heideggerian sense. It's not the psychic. Psychic is that unique entity which evolves. Atman is that which gives us the foundation of existence.
So thank you for all this. It's wonderful. Can that be sent as a document so we can print it?
Sure. I will send you. You can take these files and print them. Yes, sure.
Thank you.
Here we Sri Aurobindo speaks in a very nice way on inner and outer, how these two movements are complementary. In one, the inner being comes to the front in the one movement and impresses its own normal motions on the outer consciousness, to which they are unusual and abnormal. The other is to draw back from the outer consciousness, to go inside into the inner planes, enter into the world of your inner self, and wake in the hidden parts of your being. So consciousness can move either outside or inside, either from within to without or from without to within. That is consciousness. Yes? So it is outside moving within. It is within moving outside. When the plunge has once been taken, you are marked for the yogic or the spiritual life, and nothing can efface the seal that has been put upon you. This is from the letters. It's beautiful. Once you make that plunge within and you find your inner source, you cannot anymore deviate from that path. You will be taken by it forever. So Gita speaks about these two selves, inner and outer, in a very interesting, in a very beautiful metaphoric language. Uddharet atmanatmanam natmanam avasadayet atmaiva hyatmano bandhur atmaiva ripuratmanaha. It is, one should, by the self thou should deliver the self. Thou shouldst not depress and cast down the self, whether by self-indulgence or superstition. That's added to the understanding from Sri Aurobindo's translation. For the self is the friend of the self, and the self is the enemy. If I translate literally to you, Uddharet, one should support or raise Atmanam, oneself, Atmana, by oneself. One should raise oneself by oneself. Natmanam avasadet, one should not put down oneself, but by oneself. Atmaiva hyatmano bandhuh, because the self is the friend of oneself. Atmaiva ripur atmanach, and the self is the enemy for ourselves. So there are two selves. One should support the outer self by the inner self. One should not let the outer self be put down by the inner self, because the inner self is the true self of the outer self, and the outer self, if it is without inner self, becomes the enemy to oneself. If you don't have that inner self-realization, we treat ourselves as enemies. Bandhur atmaiva atmanastasya yenatmaiva atmanajitach. And this is very beautiful. The man is his self, a friend in whom the lower self has been conquered by the higher self. To the man is his self a friend in whom the lower self has been conquered by the higher self. But to him who is not in possession of his higher self, the lower self is as if an enemy, and it acts as an enemy. Shatrutve varteta. So it behaves as if it is an enemy. Shatruvat, as if the enemy. If we are not in control of ourselves, if our inner self is not possessing our outer being, then we are possessed by some other forces. Forces of superficial nature, of our dogmas, of our preferences, desires, those attachments to the object of sense. These attachments generate some karma, some desire which is kind of destroying us, which is leading us astray, away from ourselves. We do not know anymore ourselves. We are fighting for some cause, for some achievement, for something which was imposed on us by others. And we are losing ourselves. It's a very straightforward, actually. There is nothing wishy-washy here. But I love this definition. It's so simple and so beautiful. One is friend to oneself if one has conquered oneself, controlled, jitach, by whom one's outer self is conquered by the inner one. And one behaves as if an enemy if one is not in control of oneself. We really, and we know it, psychologically we feel it, when we are not in control, we feel that we really hate ourselves. We feel it. I feel it all the time. Every time I lose control, every time something else dictates to me the control over myself, I feel I lose, I become agitated, I'm... Don't you notice this? We are constantly fighting to find control of our outer self by our inner self. Constantly. So these are the two beings. So what is obstructing the inner and outer consciousness to be working harmoniously together? What is that? And that is that desire. The desire. And Sri Krishna has a very direct explanation of the desire. And we read already that the desire is generated from the attachment of the senses to the object of sense. It is something what we are not. We want to become something we are not. And by that attachment, there is an additional strong rajasic force generated, which is kind of leading us astray from our inner being. Possesses us, makes us slaves to the achievement of some objectives which have nothing to do with our true being. So that's why Krishna treats this desire in a very severe manner. He says that the desire is the enemy. Kill the desire. Become free from the desire. Have an inner motivation of the inner self. Enough of this following some dogmas, some dharmas, some explanations. Find your inner true self and surrender to it. That's the message. It's straightforward. It's very kshatriya message. There is no much of dispute how it is. There is a method. You can do it. You can follow karma yoga. You can discover yourself. And then everything what you do will be a delight of being. Small or big, doesn't matter. Because big and small matters little or matters not. Yes, because what matters that you made that alignment with yourself. Now the inner self is in control of your outer self. Now finally you bridged two beings, yeah? And one is helping the other. One is helping other rise and change and grow. And if every time you feel you are growing in consciousness, it becomes a celebration. It is a true delight to grow in consciousness. Every time you receive desire realized, you go down. With every realized desire, we exhaust and kill ourselves, and we feel more and more dissatisfied. With every satisfied desire, we feel more and more dissatisfied, and nothing you can do about it. It's really a trap. So, and there is a difference between desire and aspiration. That was the topic of today's discussion. How these two different, desire and aspiration. And Mother gives a very beautiful explanation to this. Yeah? She says that desire is always horizontal, always flat. It is something like, and it is also very urgent. It wants to be realized immediately. It's like, it's very impatient in its own realization. Everything has to be put on hold. The desire is to be realized. And aspiration is of totally different nature. It is calm and it can go on forever. It doesn't need the realization of itself immediately. The very aspiration becomes, if we have that aspiration, becomes a fulfillment in us of some kind. If we feel the flame of aspiration for the higher being, for the higher existence, it is self-satisfactory. It doesn't need to be satisfied. It wants to grow more and more. It's like a flame wants to grow. And once it is growing, it's already the answer in some way. And that is the difference.
question?
Yes.
So what I'm hearing, correct me, is that rather than desiring for that, is to aspire to it.
Absolutely.
Because I learned a long time ago from my own journey that the greatest desire is to be desireless. And so now we're speaking about aspiration, which I really like that concept.
Beautiful. To be desireless is actually to be able to aspire finally. Because if the desires are there kind of clogging or blocking the way, they take away our consciousness, they take away our awareness. We are fixing ourselves on the, it's like Mother says, it's like a flat. You come to the shopping center and you see some nice thing and you want to have it. It is on that level, on that immediate level. It is not on the level of your aspiration to become someone, to grow in consciousness, to overcome your obstacles, to overgrow your incapacities. Every time we overgrow our incapacities, we receive true delight. And that is aspiration. Great. Yeah, some overviews, some thoughts on these topics, please, if you like to share. We are coming to the end of our time, so would be lovely to hear your voices and your ideas. Please share.
So Vladimir,
Yes.
um,
I don't
Teresa,
see everyone, so you just switch on microphone and speak, because I don't see everyone. So
can you hear me?
yes, I can hear.
Yeah. Okay. So Teresa and I were just speaking about it. If we heard you right, that being desireless leads to aspiration, but I'm hearing it differently within myself, which is aspiration leads to being desireless.
Yeah.
Because I have chased desires before of the concept of being desireless. And I found that the greatest desire is to be desireless. But when I reframe and I substitute a path of aspiration, then the focus is not on desires. Aspiration is superior. Is that
Right.
what you're saying?
Right.
Okay.
Right. But this is, yes, this is what either one is the condition for the other. Once you are desireless, you may have this, you may discover that there is aspiration in you. There is some pure, movement in you, flame. Or you can struggle with your desires, fight with them as Buddhists do. They remove all the desires except the desire of mukti, or liberation, freedom from desire. That is the last desire they keep. And then they drop that also before they enter into nirvana, into the desireless state. So to come into that desireless state, you have to drop the last desire to be desireless. But that is a technique. It's a psychological technique. You can use it if it helps. If it works for you, it's wonderful. But there is another direct method, that to find that flame within you, that truth in you. And you don't need to fight with the desire. It will be removed. It will be burnt in that flame. It will become insignificant.
That is such a great concept. That's wonderful. I really love how we're completing the Gita with that one concept for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, some thoughts more? Fred?
I've always just one of my teachers gave the vision of a little mountain stream not having much power, and that the society is constantly trying to get all the energy to come out of my senses, and whoever can grab the most of it and turn it into profit we call successful.
Yeah.
And yet if you build a dam in the mountain stream, you get a giant lake. And to sometimes check with myself about, which has immense power, immense, and I think that I try to think of, Bill, you're on the spiritual path. Where have I built my dam in my mountain stream? Am I holding some of this energy and being careful? And sometimes I'm not, and I pay the price like we all do and spoke about. But it was very beautiful. Thank you for having us.
Beautiful image of dam, building the dam, and then when the cracks appear from somewhere, then the dam can be destroyed, then you have to rebuild it again. And this happens once in a while in a lifetime, when yes, to hold your energy, to dedicate it to your inner self rather than to spell it out outside, for running for desires which are actually exhausting our life energy. It's actually the means by which the death dominates this world. Death creates these kind of movements of desire which exhaust us and destroy our oneness. So we are caught into this net of desires. And we are so used to it that we are not even thinking that we can act differently. We are motivated by desires. If I don't have the desire, why should I even do something? I don't want, we say. Don't want. We are so used to it. It's inbuilt from our, childhood. They really, and look at this advertisement. Everything in this world, it's all about, as you say, to catch our attention, to buy us in by the desires. Look, this new camera here. I have to send you the information on the cameras. And I'm myself caught into this net of desires, cameras, objectives, better quality, this, that. So that's where our senses are caught, and we are becoming enslaved in some way. Our inner being is lost. There is no contact with our inner being. We are serving the outer master somewhere. We are drawn to the things which are less important for our self-fulfillment. They are important. We will be used as technology, as the props for some kind of future, like instruments, yes. But we are much more than simply being to be used as instruments. We are the beings which have to become conscious of our own selves. We are the masters of the universe, and we have to discover that Lord within ourselves. And that is another proposition. Yes. All right. Beautiful. So if somebody wants to say something else, is a Siegfried, there is a Prem.
Yeah, I'll make a comment here that I've been trying to formulate in my mind as you were going through here, is that it seems that at the root of desire and aspiration is the same longing for oneness, for unity, to go back to our source. And from a desire perspective, or from the ego, that oneness or unity happens through this possession. I will possess it. It is mine, and therefore I am one with it. Whereas from the true self, the inner self, that union happens through identity, right? It is me. And because it is me, I don't long for anything. I have everything that I could possibly want, and it creates the desireless state. So the point is that move, push under both those movements is the same longing for union. It's just expressed one through it's mine, I want to possess it, versus I am it. identity with it.
Beautiful,
right?
very beautiful,
So-
nice. Nice distinction. It's like two creations. One is that of those fallen emanations which can only possess, appropriate, acquire, and it is also knowledge by identity, but in ignorance and darkness. So once that, when we are in a hurry to appropriate, even without knowing what for, why should we identify ourselves with that object of sense? But still we are going for it because there is this desire to be full, to be one. And somewhere even Mother describes this, that every desire in its absolutism describes that absolute desire of the self, behind, which wants to be one. Yes? Only it is not appropriate for it to be one in that setting, in that ignorant setting where oneness is not possible yet. That's why we are in a hurry to get it, thinking that maybe that would be the solution. But that is not the solution, unfortunately. That's again the failure. And every time, as Sri Aurobindo says, we realize the desire, we are so disillusioned at the end. You know why? And he gives the psychological reason, which is amazing, which is confirming what you are saying, that when we realize the desire, we see, oh, it wasn't that what I was hoping for. I was hoping for inner contact, for that delight, which has to come, real delight. And there was no real delight. There was no real contact. So that's why desire in a proper sense cannot be satisfied. As Dhammapada would say, even the rain of golden coins cannot satisfy the desire. Rain of golden coins will not do the job. So what to say about other things? It's not meant to be satisfied. It is meant to be realized at the last stage of oneness. And we have to find that inner self, which already has itself, as you rightly said. And then there is no more desire. Then, as Isha says, all this is for habitation by the Lord. Yes? Whatever exists in this universal motion. Therefore, enjoy all this, being free from the object of sense, as the Lord is free. He is freely enjoying the world. And that is finding oneself and being in the world. And don't put everything into your pocket as if it is not yours. Yes? It's as if you want to possess it, because it is already yours. Only you have to realize it. You have to see that it is already given. And we behave as if it is not. And that is the desire, which is misleading us. Beautiful. Thank you for this, Radha.
Hello.
Yes, Siegfried.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Sorry, because in my country we had change in the time, and for me now it was the time for the beginning of the class, and it looked like it's the end. But never mind. With this last sentence brings to my mind to thinking about the I as a context. Did you hear something about that? I as a context?
No.
It's like everything our consciousness can apprehend.
Mm-hmm.
Is built it in our brain, right? Then all the outer world, which looks out of us, really is in us. It's a reconstruction we are doing in our brain. Then when we have any relation with the outer world, in finally is a relation with the inner world. Because there is no world outside. Everything is a perception in us. Then if you can see the context as your own eye, there is you can achieve your feeling of creation, because all what is in your context is you. There is no.
You're stepping back from yourself, as it were. You view yourself as a part of this creation, so to say. There is a deeper self emerging from this perception. It's like stepping back or withdrawing, or so you make yourself a context. As
Yes.
Actually, it's a nirvanic experience, as Sri Aurobindo describes it. Yeah, he saw himself as in a movie, everybody and himself as in a movie. He was not totally real. It was one big. So he found another level of consciousness from which he could view himself contextually.
Yeah, for that reason, there is no possibility to have any movement from you to the things or to the outer experiences, because everything is in you.
It's already there. Yes, right. Beautiful. Thank you. Wonderful.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. Some last words, or we then close down for today? Right. Then I will close with mantra. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramayah Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschit Dukkha Bhag Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Namaste. Thank you for being together. It was wonderful. Such a perfect group. We should come more often together.
Yes, please. I agree.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
It was a lot of love. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.